I think we can start now, Tony.
Okay then, right, thank you. Good morning to you all. Bore da chi gyd. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. Welcome to our Digital Technologies in Wales webinar. This is the second webinar in this series of presentations, which has been organised by the Welsh Economic Research Unit at Cardiff Business School and partners in the Superfast Business Wales project. I'm Tony Davis. I'm chairman of the Superfast Broadband Business Exploitation Advisory Group and your chair for this morning. Let's firstly deal with some housekeeping points. First of all, just to remind you that all mics are being disabled and this will reduce any noisy feedback. There will be a Q&A session after we've heard all the speakers. We have half an hour for Q&A. And comments and questions can be made at any time during the presentations by using the meeting chat function or the show conversation tray, which you will find at the top right-hand side of your screens. By clicking onto this icon, you'll be able to follow all the conversations and add your own comments. And I really do encourage you to forward comments and questions this morning. We have 4 excellent speakers who will be happy to respond to you. If you experience any technical difficulties, please log off and then log on again. That usually does work. But please remember, this session is being recorded, so you won't miss anything. For social media posts around this event, please use hashtag superfastconf20. That's superfastconf20. And for those of you that did not attend yesterday's session, when the Digital Maturity for Wales 2020 report was launched, you will receive a hyperlink to this report, which will appear in chat. So the Superfast Business Pan Wales project commenced during 2016, so it's been running for 5 years, and I'm glad to say it's now to be extended until September 2022. The programme has provided support to many Welsh SMEs in the form of workshops, one-to-one advice and website reviews, software directories, and since COVID, a host of online courses. And I know that many of you registered for this event this morning have benefited from this programme. Yesterday's session focused on the research findings about digitalisation in Wales and what future challenges remain. The focus on today's session is how policy in Wales is supporting businesses to respond to ongoing digitisation as well as the challenge of COVID-19. The survey launched yesterday shows that Welsh SMEs have embraced digital technologies with ever-increasing gusto, as over 80% of firms in the survey are now using foundational as well as advanced cloud computing services. Also highlighted in the report is the role that digital technologies are playing in supporting firms to adapt to new business practices during COVID-19. And I know that many of you, not only are you surviving because of digital, but you're actually growing your customer base. But what of the future? We have this ongoing COVID period to deal with, and of course there'll be post-COVID to consider, as well as post-Brexit, whatever that's going to look like, which is of course just a few weeks away. Additionally, developments in digital technologies and data network infrastructure are advancing. Increased use of artificial intelligence, headless commerce, Internet of Things, an increasing array of cloud business applications, increased availability of ultra-fast broadband, 5G networks, and so on. All these wonderful developments will actually create challenges for our firms in Wales, because if they do not embrace new technologies to improve their business efficiencies and products and service offerings, then of course their competitors will. Therefore, ongoing support for Welsh businesses in responding to ongoing digitalisation is crucial. As the Deputy Minister said yesterday, and I quote, "Supporting digital adoption for businesses has never been more important." So our session this morning will consider, firstly, the changing policy environment around digital intervention in Wales. Secondly, a review of digital innovation for the economy and future of work in Wales. Thirdly, digital infrastructure and skill challenges for Wales. And then finally, a peep into the future of digital technology developments. So I'm really looking forward to hearing these speakers. So let me first of all introduce our first speaker, and this is Michael Groves. Michael is the operational lead for the Welsh Government's digital economy portfolio, and also the programme director for this Superfast Business Wales programme. He has many years of experience in developing and managing digital support programmes for our firms in Wales. So Michael, over to you.
Good morning, thank you, Tony. Hopefully everybody can see and hear me, and what I'll do is get my slides up very shortly. I apologise in advance if there's any background noise. It's likely to be me. By horrible bad luck, today is the day that we've got somebody laying a kitchen floor for us, and it's been a horrible 9 months in trying to turn a new house into a home during the lockdown period. So if there is any noise, and hopefully there won't be a great deal, we'll be able to get through that, so apologies. I'm just trying to share my slides with everybody, and hopefully won't have any problems with that if everybody can see that. Tony, can you give me some indication if that's being shared okay?
Yes, that's fine, Michael.
That's fine.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. What I'd like to do is share with everybody a bit of a sense of what's going on with regards to policy, with regards to digital broadly, but specifically digital economy in Wales. As Tony mentioned, the Deputy Minister joined us yesterday, and he's leading from a politician's perspective on the digital strategy moving forward. I'd like to just be able to share with everybody a sense of what's going on. We find ourselves very interesting times, but from a strategy perspective, the first time that I can remember in a good number of years where a lot of different principles and strategies are aligning for the good all at the same time. So I'll try to take you through what is going on at the moment from a Welsh Government perspective and how that will in time then filter down to activities on the ground. So first and foremost, just to bring to everybody's attention the guiding policies and strategies that are, I guess, at the forefront of activities with regards to digital strategy in Wales. As I'm sure everybody can recognise, we have a commitment to deliver against the First Minister's manifesto. Another key influencer here was a body of work that was led by Deputy Minister Lee Waters himself, called Systems Reboot, which looked predominantly at transforming public services through digital. And then thirdly, and I'm very pleased that we have Professor Phil Brown following me on the line this morning, Brown Review, which was submitted to government last September, and that is also a key influencer to activities. Now, it's probably worth noting that had it not been for the COVID pandemic, we would have been further ahead of where we are currently. We certainly would have liked to have been, but as I'm sure everybody can understand, that's taken a number of things off track. Critically, Deputy Minister provided oral statement on Tuesday, which announced the publishing of an all Wales digital strategy. That will take place over the next couple of weeks and months in a series of posts. We'll be publishing over the coming weeks blogs about each of the missions, which I'll get to, which underlie and collectively make up that strategy. Aim is to publish the final strategy next year. That doesn't mean that action's on hold until then. There's already a huge amount going on across organisations in Wales to deliver better services and create a better Wales. So we plan to showcase some of these in upcoming posts and events. The posts and the blogs for that, I will put, they're on my slides later through the run, but I'll also put them in the comments box as well. That All Wales digital strategy will encompass all aspects of government portfolio. So it isn't just limited to digital economy, although that'll be the focus of what I'll talk about today. The digital economy strand itself integrates Brown Review recommendations quite heavily, but also will pay quite a heavy amount of credence to economic recovery strategy, which obviously has been brought about as a result of COVID. And that has 4 key strands. They are listed on the slide there. You'll see people, places, green and digital. So not only have we got a substantial body of work and recommendations from the Brown Review, we've got digital as one of 4 key pillars in the economic recovery strategy moving forward as well. So what does a digital strategy for Wales look like? Slide you've got there was published day before yesterday with regards to the announcement by Deputy Minister. It seeks to give a high-level overview of the different missions, as we're referring to them, for digital strategy. And as you'll see there, as I mentioned, it spans across the whole of government portfolio. So what we'll do through this presentation is dig down a little more on digital economy, which you'll see on the right-hand side there. But at the heart of all of this, the mission is to improve quality of life, sustainability, economic growth, creating user-centered public services supported by effective leadership, data, and a culture of innovation and collaboration. So addressing the digital agenda, it's been agreed that there are principally 2 distinct areas of delivery, and that is public sector digital transformation and digital economy. Now, the first of the 2 is a significant body of work, and that will be principally addressed by the Office of the Chief Digital Officer in Wales. Just take that away from the screen, sorry. And digital economy will be addressed by Economy, Science and Natural Resources Programme Board that we've convened to address purely digital economy aspects. Now, it's worth noting, and Deputy Minister referred to this yesterday, we have a new Chief Digital Officer within Welsh Government that was taken post within the last 12 months. Glyn Jones, who's been working with government in various different roles previously, is a hugely enthusiastic and very energised individual who I know is going to be taking forward all aspects of public sector digital transformation, and he'll be supported in that role by a new Chief Digital Officer for local government, which has recently been appointed. And then the plan moving forward is to also appoint a Chief Digital Officer for health in Wales. As I'm sure you can appreciate, NHS have had their hands full, certainly in Wales and the rest of the UK for the last 9 months or so. So that is a post that we're waiting still to recruit to. I know my slides have hung a little, bear with me. There we go. So what I'd like to do very, very quickly is just, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, this is just to try and share with everybody a sense of the scale of activities that we're seeking to try and address underneath the new All Wales digital strategy. So just to give people a sense of what public sector digital transformation looks like. In the middle there, we've got our top end objective and goal, I guess. But then surrounding that are just some of the high level areas that will be incorporated in that activity. So to the left there, at the top left, we're looking at Welsh Government digital transformation of services and local government digital transformation of services. And you'll see the topics that as examples, and as I said, by no means exhaustive list, that will fall underneath those remits. We also need to ensure that we're driving forward public sector cyber resilience, public health digital transformation of services, as well as a huge area of work, which when the Chief Digital Officer for NHS Wales is appointed, will no doubt have a fullest attention. Public sector data sharing and AI exploitation is also something that we're keen to make sure we do far more of. Public sector holds a vast amount of data on a variety of different topics. We want to make sure that we're mining and exploiting that data more effectively, and where artificial intelligence can be exploited to better effective delivery of service to citizens, we want to see that happen as well. And also we need to make sure we're engaging with experts in digital excellence. It would be futile of us to suggest that anybody in Welsh Government has the answers to all of the questions, so we need to ensure that we're engaging with experts effectively in this. Now, to address the area of probably more relevance to the audience today, it's certainly my area of work as well with the digital support that we provide to businesses, digital economy and skills. So within the All Wales digital strategy, we've got, as I said, a number of different missions. Digital economy is one of those missions. And the principles of the digital economy activity is to drive economic growth, productivity, resilience, and all of these things by embracing and exploiting innovation to better effect. And again, this is by no means an exhaustive list, because the strategy is, as I mentioned at the outset, about to go through a blogging process to garner input and reaction from Wales. These are some of the high-level activities which I'm sure people may recognise from the Brown Review influencing these as well. So we need to make sure that business support activity is supporting our business community with regards to digital adoption. As Tony mentioned at the outset, I'm very pleased that we've been able to secure additional funding from Cabinet and also marry additional WEFO resources to extend the existing we provide to businesses. For those of you that were with us yesterday, you will have seen the presentation on the support that is already available in Wales that we know makes a significant difference to the businesses that engage with that. That forms part of the Business Wales offering, but we need to make sure that we're developing that and reacting to a changing marketplace and changing needs that have been brought about from COVID. Digital infrastructure exploitation, we need to make sure that we are exploiting our infrastructure to best effect. There's been a significant investment in digital infrastructure by Welsh Government over the last 4 or 5 years, which without having done that, I'm sure we would find ourselves in a very different situation than we are currently. The investment in infrastructure, superfast broadband, public sector broadband aggregation, etc., has all facilitated to the largest part the ability for us to be able to continue to do our jobs in a time when we can't necessarily go to locations such as offices. There's developing work around 5G, IoT, LoRaWAN. We need to make sure that these infrastructures are exploited by our businesses and also by other members of our community. We need to make sure that there's a focus on digital innovation and research. I've mentioned already the need to be able to do more with the data that we hold, but also do more with the data that businesses have got access to as well, and make sure that there are support structures and activities taking place to drive forward data analytics. There is currently a joint proposal for a collaborative academic-led AI Institute, a centre of excellence in Wales, which will need to ensure that it is delivering new technologies, new ways of working, and advice and support, and commercialises its research and activities and shares that with industry effectively. Digital skills for the future is also an area that we need to make sure that we're satisfying. There isn't, I think, a single sector or industry that would not say that they suffer from a lack of digital skills. We know from the work that Cardiff University have published this week and have been working on for the last 4 or 5 years that skills does consistently fall short of where we would ideally like them to be, although we do see improvements year on year with digital skills in the workforce. But there's work going on from colleagues that I know are on this call and others that will be looking to review skills frameworks, try to influence curriculum reform, but ensure that digital becomes much more of a priority. We also need to ensure that we accelerate industrial transformation. Now, colleagues of mine elsewhere in Welsh Government work on this as a focus, but my area of interest here is specifically around digital transformation of clusters, sectors, and different industry verticals. Now, Brown Review made some recommendations around which of these clusters we should prioritise. That's always going to be an evolving area of work, but clearly, much in the same way that legislation or regulatory change takes place in industry verticals, we want to make sure that technologies are being exploited by industries to the best effect as well. There's some fantastic work already taking place across Wales in some of these areas, including cyber, agri-tech and precision agri-tech, fintech as well. I happen to chair a Westminster forum on Monday around fintech, and there's obviously an increasing demand for technologies in a number of these areas, which we're keen to make sure that Welsh Government is influencing and supporting where we can. My slide on. Okay, so I mentioned at the outset that the Office of the Chief Digital Officer is going to take lead on public sector digital transformation. Digital economy, as I've already referred to it, is an area that I'm heavily involved in, but this is a body of work that spans across the whole of economy, science and natural resources. We have in recent months convened a Digital Economy Programme Board. This Digital Economy Programme Board will be responsible for aligning Welsh Government activities in this space. And as you can see from the boxes on the screen there, that board is made up of senior representation from a number of facets across the SNR within Welsh Government. So that includes all three of the Chief Regional Officers, the Economic Policy Unit, Business and Entrepreneurship, which is responsible for the largest chunk of business support activities that we deliver in Wales, Economic Infrastructure, clearly, and a number of other areas of Welsh Government that you can see clear linkages to the previous slides that I've shared with you. Now, the core purpose of that board is to take a whole ESNR and partners pan-Wales approach to delivering against the commitments and aspirations that will be set out within the All Wales Digital Strategy. We're not seeking with this board to take control or ownership of all of the activities that go on. That would just simply be impossible. But to seek to raise profile and guide activities towards collective objectives where possible. We find ourselves in a time where, due to Brexit and the near end of the existing round of European structural funds, where we will be able to be more distinct around the activities we want to deliver and their key outputs and results, without having to necessarily be shackled by European rules on what programs need to deliver. We'll be able to make sure we're delivering things to objectives that meet the commitments within the digital strategy. The board will also act as a gateway for proposals and initiatives, both internally within Welsh Government and from those seeking government support or funding that are externally led. Now, the reason for that is to make sure that there is a sanity check and a sounding board that either internal colleagues or external partners can bring proposals for activities to get input, feedback and support in order for us to make sure that we're delivering against the digital strategy. But also one of the areas of work I want to do with that programme board is to develop some meaningful metrics against the digital agenda and make sure that we're measuring the right things. Core objectives, as I said then, is to support the economy, realise measurable economic benefit from the accelerated adoption of digital technologies, to champion digital themes, for example, artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud computing, etc., and to do that where possible across industry vertical clusters. That may very well take the form of convening digital working groups that made up representations from various different industries to make sure that we're spotting the opportunities, the challenges and the needs of these different clusters and ensuring that the right kind of support then is moving them forward. But above all else, we want to make sure that we're fostering and embedding a collaborative ecosystem of activities, not only across the SNR, but interacting effectively with the Office of the Chief Digital Officer and public sector digital transformation demands more broadly. So realising and reporting successes, well, the board will bring existing and new activities that contribute to the digital agenda into a cross-divisional collaborative practice. What does that mean in simple terms? We want to make sure that things are aligned. We want to make sure that various different activities are complementary to that other which we do within Welsh Government, but also externally as well. Strategically, it'll coordinate those activities. We'll look to develop and commission new deliverables to meet the commitments. We'll effectively engage with industrial stakeholders and academia alike. I've mentioned already we want to identify appropriate metrics, but importantly monitor the impact as well. Now, the work that we've done with Cardiff University and the reports that have been published this week are one healthy step towards making sure that we're monitoring the impact of digital in the economy. That programme board then also will report jointly with the Office of the Chief Digital Officer to a ministerial digital policy and strategy group made up of representation from ministers with varying different portfolios to ensure that we're making sure that we've got traction and support for the activities being delivered. So just towards wrapping up now, I've got 10:25 on my screen. The digital strategy for Wales, I'll put the links into the chat so that people can get involved with the blogging process and that interaction moving forward. You'll see there the digital economy is on the right, but there are other aspects of the strategy which in time, on I think a week by week basis, we'll be releasing the dialogue for each of those. Those are the blogs there. I'll make sure that they go into the chat link, but please have a look at them. We've also tweeted those from the Chief Digital Officer's account, so please retweet or share those links and get involved and spread the word, I would say. Now that's my slides exhausted. Tony, I'm very happy to hand back to you.
Right, that's great. Many thanks to you for that, Michael. A lot of food for thought on that. So turning to our second speaker now, Professor Phil Brown. Phil is a distinguished research professor in the School of Social Sciences at Cardiff University. He chaired an independent review, as we've heard, for the Welsh Government, examining the impact of digital innovation for the economy and the future of work in Wales, which has contributed to the Digital Strategy for Wales, launched only this week and mentioned by Michael. He is currently leading a comparative research programme on digital futures of work, and he is also one of the core team leading the Pan Wales Data Nation Accelerator proposal. So over to you, Phil.
Thank you, Tony. Let me just share my screen, if I may. Can you see that?
Yes, that's fine,
Yes,
Phil.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, it was I'm very pleased to be part of this discussion, and it was very pleasing to hear what Michael just said about some of the initiatives now taking place within Welsh Government. I think the pandemic has made it more difficult for us all. We reported in September 2019. So it's taken a while, but we are making progress, and much more, however, is going to be required. Let me just say a little bit about the review, and then I want to talk a little bit about the DNA initiative, if I may. What we set out to do really was to try and get a better understanding of digital innovation and its impact on the economy and future of work in Wales. And of course, that started with some of the challenges, the impact of automation on jobs. And there were lots of claims that up to half of jobs would disappear within 20 years. And then when we looked at the evidence, then what we see is actually that's grossly exaggerated. But equally, it's not the case that the future will just create more jobs than it's done in the kind of the past and previous industrial kind of revolutions. That is not necessarily going to happen. Because one of the reasons for that is because technology is not fate. We can shape the technologies in different ways. So how we think about them, how we use them in companies and in organizations, and its impact on labor is determined in the way in which those technologies are actually applied. So that for us was a very important starting point. And then thinking, well, how does this really relate to Wales? And what we kind of thought was that Wales is in a really good position because there are a lot of good initiatives going on, but it's actually a question of scaling. It's actually how can we kind of change the narrative? How can we take some of the good things going on and really try to bring them together around some idea of a digital nation? And so we talk about Wales 4.0. So Wales in the fourth industrial revolution. What might that look like? Well, one of the things actually is crucial is how we transform key industries, as well as the grassroots economy in Wales, in ways that not only benefit a few, but also are more inclusive and sustainable. Fundamental challenge, not just for Wales, but across the kind of globe. And what we kind of came up with was this idea of Wales as a digital nation, the idea of a narrative around coal mining to data mining, and this for us seems to work, but it's a window of opportunity, and a lot of other places are doing very similar things now. So we've got to make sure that whatever we do, we need to really try to accelerate this, and of course COVID makes that quite difficult. Because while it's accelerated some aspects of digital innovation, like us working at home, it's been very uneven. It's taken our eye off the ball in other areas, which is really unfortunate. So when we talk about building back better, we still need to keep an eye on that forward-looking strategy for economic recovery. It's really important we don't get bogged down too much in the here and now, although of course there are certain things that we really have to do. In the review, we identify 7 areas or 7 kind of work streams. And the reason for doing this was to give a sense of how we need to bring things together. And number 1, certainly for me, was this accelerating industrial transformation. We have to move the economy. We cannot create better jobs for people unless we do that. And that also, therefore, has a critical role for the SME sector, which I'll go on to talk about in a moment. So the challenge for Welsh Government and for us all is really to think about this kind of much more joined up approach and how we scale and how we align. And we're seeing some of that in what Michael was saying, and that is actually very encouraging. But we need to think about beyond the public sector. We need to also think about the kind of private sector economy, although of course they overlap in very significant ways. And one of the other things that we wanted to recommend was this focus on innovation clusters. Now, of course, we can discuss what would go into these clusters, but the important thing is to recognize that the technology is a general purpose. They don't just impact in one place, they impact across the whole economy. And therefore, we need to think, well, where can we have the most kind of impact? How can we really move the economy in these different areas? And these were the clusters we came up with. And I'm very pleased to hear that this kind of strategy will be taken up now in the economic recovery plan. And as part of that, what we also thought is for each of those clusters, we need to think about what would the industrial transformation roadmap look like? And again, I think what I was particularly keen on is to try to keep things together so that we can look at jobs, we can look at skills, we can look at productivity and those issues of innovation, but also how this ties in with international value chains and how we can lock into those value chains in more value-added ways, if you like. And so the theme running through this kind of combination was around mainstreaming digital. It was around aligning, bringing things together. It was around a sense of priority. You know, what do we cut out? What do we stop doing? As well as what do we now invest in? And crucially, as everybody knows on this call, it's about scaling. It's about taking some of those good initiatives that we have and how we scale those and diffuse those. And one of the things that we've been looking at is this idea of a Wales Data Nation Accelerator, the DNA proposal. And although this is seen to be, and it's been described as coming out of the universities, it's very important to recognise that it really comes out of the review. And the reason for saying that is because business and industry has to be at the heart of this. If it's not a proper collaboration, then it's not going to work. So this is not just universities going out to the employers, it has to be co-creation. And that, for me, if we don't have that, it's not going to be successful. But there is this opportunity, as we all know, of how do we bring these data sets together? We're in a fantastic position to do this in the Welsh context, but we need to start work and decide where are the priorities, what kind of data are we going to bring together. So we want to use the clusters as a kind of form of challenge areas. And we'd also include the public sector here, or public services here, then think, well, what kind of data could we bring together? And then think, because the data doesn't speak for itself. So the question then is, how do we use that data? How do we then accelerate that data in a way which can benefit companies, and how do we benefit from some of the advances in AI? And how do we also then link that to the issue of skills and training? And here again, for me, I'm not only looking at the top end of doctorate education or postdocs. I also want to see the whole spine of the skills structure, the role of FE colleges, that kind of multiversity kind of approach to this, which I think is going to be crucial as we move forward. So in terms of the Data Nation Accelerator and SMEs, what we know also not only is that industry is going to be crucial, but the SMEs are crucial. You know, so many people are employed in SMEs of under kind of 50 staff, and therefore it's really important to think carefully about how we are to engage with SME companies. And because it also seems that you know, we've got to find ways of addressing that missing middle. We can't just rely on anchor companies. And if I had more time, I'd explain why what we're seeing is a concentration of data within these anchor companies, which can be moved to places very, very rapidly indeed. So we've got to build that indigenous internal capacity, which is going to be absolutely vital. And we've got to think, where's the stickiness that will keep people in Wales and keep companies in Wales. What we also see from the surveys that have been done through super fast broadband, the research that you're doing, is that there's been improvement, but there's also a very long tail. So for us, the DNA really is about thinking, how do we accelerate the benefits to SMEs through the development of data and digital platforms, which offer the potential for shared services in a way which we probably haven't thought about quite before, and with new opportunities that weren't available previously. And one of the things that's come across from our workshops that we've done is really this question of the art of the possible, that people want demonstrators. What is this? In other words, what does it look like? How can I interact with it? And what will it cost me? And how can I actually really engage with this in a meaningful way for my organization? And we hear that very clearly, and we need to find ways of addressing it. And of course, the value through data and through AI comes as much, if not more, through process innovation than it does product innovation. And so it's the way we do things and changing the ways that we do things, which is going to be very important, as well as new kind of products. And I personally have got a strong interest in the role of AI, in the idea of a distributed industrial transformation. In other words, if we take seriously the foundational economy and we think about that in more ambitious terms, about how digital could be mainstreamed and how it could be used in relation, for example, to distributed manufacturing as well as distributed office, then I think we could begin to experiment with in quite an interesting way in Wales. And I'd really like the DNA to do some of that work. So in short, you know, there are a lot of good initiatives going on, and things, you know, we are starting to bring things together. But is this an actual step change? We have to wait and see. So I want to try and push things further if possible, because as I said, the technology is not fate, and you know, we are in real danger of labour substitution and labour standardisation, which people talk less about, but for me, that's one of the crucial things, as well as this augmentation of skill. You know, we are going to see fundamental changes in the nature of employment. What it means to be employed is really going to shift quite dramatically if some of our current research comes to bear. But that transformation journey that we're talking about, which we all kind of share in a way, depends upon really understanding how best to engage with people and with firms. And I think that's been one of the real benefits of the super fast broadband accelerator kind of program projects is in getting a better understanding of what the SMEs are doing, how they're engaging or not engaging in digital. And it seems to me that we also need to think about how do we build a relational approach and not just a transactional approach. It's not just creating a web platform which people can engage in. Yeah, that's okay. But the real value comes from that dynamic process of learning between different partners and different companies in the same and different sectors. And really, it's how we build that, and we got a chance of doing that in Wales, and that I think is something we need to kind of focus on. And I'm really pleased to hear that there'll be increasing funding for your program. I think it's really important. It's going to be really interesting to see how COVID has impacted on the way in which digital is being used. And I'd like to see some of the gaps as well as some of the more positive developments. And also, I'm very interested in the case studies that you've conducted. And we need to really think about how that case study work and how that survey really can inform the DNA. But the more general strategy that we're thinking about is one that we will continue to pursue and try to push Welsh Government on. And there will be further discussion about how we might move forward in a number of different areas. But that's a very rushed overview. So hopefully that was of some interest.
Well, many thanks to you for that, Phil. That followed on nicely from Michael's presentation. Can I remind everybody about comments, questions? Remember to type your comments using the chat function. We have one question so far. That's not good enough. So come on, get those questions in. And so far, we've heard from a government official and an academic. Now we're going to hear from an entrepreneur. Indeed, a very successful entrepreneur based down here in Cardiff. He's Giles Phelps, and Giles describes himself as an entrepreneur and advocate of new technology. Since establishing the internet service provider Spectrum Internet in 2005, he has continuously taken an active role in supporting new digital startups with ultra-fast and full fibre broadband. Giles is a member of my Superfast Broadband Business Exploitation Advisory Group, where his on-the-ground experience is really very much appreciated. He uses his knowledge to articulate how SMEs can best capitalise on the opportunities Superfast Broadband and digital technology delivers for commercial advantage. So over to you, Giles.
Thank you, Tony, for the introduction. And hopefully I'll get my presentation to come up on the screen, which should happen very shortly if I can get the right one. Just check, has that come up on your screen?
Yes, that's showing nicely.
Okay, great.
Good.
Hopefully that's, bear with me a second. I'm just going to get the first slide up on my, make sure I can actually see this. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to talk about a bit about infrastructure and some of the things we've been doing, but also some of the challenges we have in Wales and relate that to skills. As Tony mentioned, I'm a big advocate of digital technology, and I think we've seen some quite interesting challenges as we've been building this infrastructure and working with a lot of the SME community. It's been an eye-opener for me. So I've been really pleased to be part of the Superfast initiative, and I'm hoping that we can develop and build it on. I'm glad it's being extended because I think there's still a lot more to do. So I'll quickly run through some of my slides that I have on this. So predominantly, we still have a copper-based infrastructure in Wales. 80% of our current broadband infrastructure is using copper cables at some form or other in the network. This is obviously something that is being slowly replaced. One of the companies I'm working for, Spectrum Internet, is doing that, and obviously there are other players like Openreach and Virgin doing this. But it's been slow progress up to date. And I think we're only just catching up with what's going on. But as I'll speak later, there are some challenges with this. I'm going to have a little dig. This will be the only little dig that I will have against BT stroke Openreach. And hopefully if you see that little clip of Charlie Brown, those of you old enough will remember that Lucy would convince Charlie Brown to kick the ball, and every time when Charlie Brown goes to kick the ball, Lucy pulls it away and laughs as he falls flat on his back. And this throughout the whole series of Charlie Brown, she kept doing it, but he never learned. Lucy would always convince him that she wouldn't take the ball away, but he still did it. Only yesterday we had a situation with Openreach, who decided and announced that in January they're increasing their prices for a particular service that a lot of alternative network providers use to provide backhaul to their full fibre builds. And Openreach have just announced that they're virtually doubling the prices if you are an altnet building fibre to the premise and you're using a particular Openreach service, that they're going to double the price. If you're just using that service to supply a single business or person, then that's no problem. But if you're supplying multiple people, we're going to increase the price. And I think this is just my last, my only dig is to say, public sector seems to have a very good policy of providing funding to Openreach on a number of occasions. And I think continually Openreach and BT will tell the public sector, oh, we've got this great new product, we can help you, we will build out infrastructure. And they fund it, and then something happens. And I think this latest announcement yesterday was a classic example. And this really is an issue, because if we don't have competition, we don't have innovation. And we have very little competition in Wales. It's really important that we bring alternative providers into Wales. We need that innovation. We've got some Virgin in South Wales, but generally there is very, very little to go on. As I mentioned, that variety causes us some problems. We have a lot of what we could call lit optical services. You can pretty much, I think BT stroke Openreach would say that you can get fibre anywhere in Wales. And you pretty much can, but you have to pay for it. And that's one of the challenges. We've seen with alternative providers in some parts of England where they're paying sort of less than £20 for a 1 gigabit service, whereas areas in Wales, especially those that are deprived to get that kind of service, would be paying hundreds of pounds. And that's just not right. And it's due to a lack of competition. It also, as I said, stifles innovation. We need products and services that run on, for instance, dark fibre, so we can light it ourselves and we can put equipment on either end of that fibre, that we can develop services and products that are fit for the future rather than rely on some antiquated infrastructure. So it's really critical that we do have that variety. As I've mentioned, 80%, that's quite a huge mountain to climb, and we literally have mountains to climb. We are a very rural country, and it is hard enough to deploy this infrastructure without the fact that it's rural. Plus, if we're going to build infrastructure, it needs to be world-class infrastructure. What do I mean by world-class? Again, this isn't about speed. This is about quality. This is about flexibility. We need to have an infrastructure that supports all the innovation and developments that come off the back of it. We can't have digital transformation without infrastructure. If you look at some of the other developed parts of the world and places like Singapore, for instance, with the pandemic, they reacted so quickly. They became a very touchless society. They implemented technology to avoid touching keypads and things like this. Also, a lot of their leisure industry and hospitality industry rapidly moved to booking sessions online rather than just letting people turn up at any particular time, but they stayed open and they kept businesses going. And I think that shows what happens when you've got a world-class infrastructure. So that's what I mean. We've got two elements to this. We're a rural country, but we also need to build world-class infrastructure. We can't afford to just keep putting sticking plasters on what we do. And also a common discussion point, it is a wired and wireless world. We will not replace fibre optic cables and become all wireless. There are physical limitations to what wireless will do. And to be honest, every time we increase the capacity and performance of wireless, it just increases the demand for backhaul capacity. So we very much will live in a world where there will be innovation in the wireless and also the wired world. So we need to make sure that we've got everything fibered up. That's not just homes, but lampposts, street furniture, roads, rail. The whole network and the whole of Wales needs to be connected with a wired infrastructure, and then we can use the wireless infrastructure for the mobile world. So I think when we talk about Internet of Things, for instance, we need to make sure that we can have all of that technology without looking around for particular types of expensive technology. So moving on to this, we have a skills problem. Building this infrastructure is not easy. We are very much ourselves accelerating this build, and we are finding that we're having to bring in contractors and talent outside of Wales that just simply isn't enough in Wales. At the same time, talent that is in Wales is also being pulled outside of Wales. We have a huge skills gap. We don't have enough fibre engineers. We don't have enough wireless engineers. We've absolutely got to address this. And I think this is one of the things that we need to do. We need to make sure that we're training people up and that we also have the ability to retain that talent. There's no good just training the engineers for everybody else to use. And when we're developing that talent, we need people that can build these networks. We need people that can maintain these networks, but we also need people that can develop and innovate networks. At the moment, most of this technology is imported. There is very little even in the UK. And I think unless we have the infrastructure and we have the skills to build and maintain it, but we then need to develop engineers so that we can actually be a leader in this field rather than a follower. If we're looking at the skills gap, I'm a big fan of bringing women into the digital space. We have been pathetic at doing this up until now. There was an interesting Richard Dimbleby lecture in 2015 with Martha Lane Fox, who pointed out at that time how we could plug the skills gap if we could just get women into the digital marketplace. And I think this is something that is incredibly important to what we're doing. We still have what we will call a male, pale and stale workforce in the IT industry. And I think we can probably help plug this skills gap if we can just understand that we need women, we need more diversity in this space. And I think, you know, the fact that we've been talking about this for a number of years, we have to double our efforts in training and development and take a really good look at ourselves of what we've been doing. I think, unfortunately, we've just given a classic example today of all the people presenting are generally in the category I've just spoken about. And I think, you know, we've just got to do something about that. If we really want to address this problem, it really something needs to be done. Another thing that I mentioned as well, we build this infrastructure and we've seen billions poured into the building of infrastructure in Wales and all over the UK and indeed the world. But it is amazing how we just rely on gravity almost to bring businesses to this infrastructure and to get them to use it in a particular way. And we just haven't concentrated on that training and development that's needed. And obviously some of the research that we're doing shows how businesses really benefit from the digital technology. And we need to absolutely, again, invest more money. If we're investing billions in infrastructure, we should invest billions in training and development. It's been interesting over the last few months with the COVID pandemic, how we've started using collaboration tools like Zoom and Teams. And most people have fallen into it and taught themselves how to use it. And yet I am seeing very large businesses, corporates, investment houses, very prominent businesses. And when I go on a Teams meeting with them, how they fumble through the Teams meeting and don't know how to use the application to its best ability. So it's not just restricted to the SME community. But it just goes to show that the SME community has a real opportunity to take on some of the larger businesses and really develop their efficiency. So I think it's really important that we do this. Again, those efficiency gains can have a huge impact on a business. We've seen a number of small businesses that have developed apps and have started selling online and remotely. I've spoken to a number of businesses that had physical footprints and shops that when COVID first struck, they closed down, but they opened up an online business, and some of them have just come out and said, actually, I don't think I'm going to go back to a physical presence. I'm doing so well online. I'm going to keep developing that business. So I think these small efficiency gains we talk about, that just moving to an online presence and having a website can have a huge impact on that business. It can transform that business, and that's something we should concentrate on, getting some of those quick wins. I think we also now know that there are opportunities with cloud and other digital technologies. That means that if these small businesses can just learn and adapt, there are tools available to them that cost them pounds, for things that used to cost corporate businesses thousands of pounds and have an army of technical engineers to maintain. Small businesses can get access to those for only a few pounds a month. And so it really is worth that investment and training, and to be constantly learning. And I think it's very difficult for SMEs. They're concentrating on keeping their core business running, and sometimes they don't have time to look up and learn new skills. And I think that's one of the big problems and challenges we need to address in Wales. We have a big SME community. We need to give them some help and support, and we need to help them look above the parapet and say, this is what you could do. Because I think then it's a catch-22 situation. Once they do that, they will find they have a lot more time to make sure that they can promote and build their business. There's been a lot of talk around AI, machine intelligence, machine learning, and data, big data analysis. But again, this is another example of all these wonderful tools that are available. You don't have to invest thousands or tens of thousands or millions of pounds in this. For a few pounds, you can get access to tools that will help small businesses develop and grow their business, enable them to learn more about their businesses, what products they're selling, what target market they're selling to, how can they increase that target market, how they can test looking into new target markets. All of this is available now for only a few pounds, and I think this is a real opportunity for small businesses to really develop that strategy. We also need, ironically, support businesses to support the SMEs. We don't have a very big digital business community at the moment. I get an awful lot of people talking to me saying, do you know a good website design company? Do you know a business that can help me develop and build an app? And unfortunately, they are few and far between. And I think we need to help those companies nurture, and we need to encourage those companies to grow, because again, it helps to support the wider economy. So I think it's absolutely important, and to me, this is the foundation of the digital economy. We need these trainers and we need these learners to help the SME community to grow and develop. And I think that's quite dramatic. I think we've demonstrated COVID, unfortunately, took us very by surprise to a certain extent. But one thing it did demonstrate was how quickly you can digitally transform your business. And I think we saw a huge growth in working from home. I was listening to a talk by Satya Nadella from Microsoft, who was saying that from the stats that Microsoft has seen, that there had been more digital transformation in the first 3 months of COVID than they'd seen in the previous 3 years. So I think it demonstrates how we can change, we can develop, we can build our skills. And I think we should take something from this. We should learn and say, this isn't not an impossible task. This isn't an uphill battle, that it can be done. And I think that's a good takeaway from what we've been doing. So when I mentioned before about the infrastructure, I was talking about flexibility for a world-class infrastructure, and we need that because that helps us develop new technologies. Those new technologies help us to develop new ideas, and those new ideas lead to high-paid, skilled jobs in the economy. So we need that foundation of a good infrastructure. We need it to be flexible. We want to look at things like full optical routing rather than electronic switching. These kind of things, we want to play with that infrastructure and develop. We need a whole R&D network to help us develop those skills. We don't just want to be procuring all these developments. We don't want to be the ones going, yes, fine, we can get 8K Netflix. We want to be the ones developing the compression routines. We want to be able to develop the big data algorithms that help us identify new stuff. If we don't have the infrastructure to enable us to do that, then we're going to be in a difficult situation. I keep saying this is something I'm very, very passionate about. There has never been a better time to start a business or develop a business in the digital space. And there's never been a better time for a business to start up and use digital tools. I constantly hear people saying, oh, we need to be a new Silicon Valley and this kind of thing. And, we've missed the boat. We should have started this 20 years ago. And that's absolutely the wrong way to look at it. I'm a big fan of some of JFK's speeches, and I think there's a particular the Moon speech, as it was called in Rice University. So I'm going to plagiarize some of that speech, and I think it really impacts this. If we were to look at the 50,000 years of man's recorded history in a time span of 50 years, condense it down, we know very little about what man did in the first 40 years. We don't know. 10 years ago, effectively, man emerged from the cave to construct another shelter. 5 years ago, man learned to write and use a cart with wheels. And the printing press was invented a year ago. 2 months ago, we had the steam engine. And last month, electric lights, telephones, automobiles, and aeroplanes were built and invented. Last week, we discovered penicillin, television, and nuclear power. Yesterday, the internet was invented, and last night, the iPhone. And I think I added the bits at the end just to highlight the condensed time span that we've had so much innovation in digital technology. It's really a very, very small space in time. And that exponential growth in the development of technology means that you can start today and you can be a leader tomorrow. It really is that great an opportunity. And I think that's what we need to look at and say to ourselves, if we really want to develop digital technologies in Wales, we need to change our mindset of looking back and saying, well, we haven't done this, we haven't done that, we haven't got that, we haven't got the infrastructure. We can absolutely do this now, and there's no time better than doing it now. Finally, one of my other passions, and the last thing I'll mention, is we need to look at a planet first approach when it comes to digital technology. It's not just about jobs, it's not just about the economy. We really need to think about the environment, and that should be a winner from the use of this technology. There's a big push now with a lot of investment houses. Everybody's recognizes that businesses cannot succeed without a stable climate. We are seeing more and more of that instability, and we're seeing it impact on the economy. And I think most investment houses now are being pushed. We've got the climate summit next year, and it's very important that we understand what we can do with digital technology and how that can impact the climate. And I think this is extending into this. We need to look at how we can help businesses become carbon neutral or even become carbon negative. Many companies like Microsoft and IKEA are looking at becoming carbon negative, and they can do this. We also need to look at it ourselves in our own businesses. We saw with COVID again the impact on travel and the fact that we were using so much more remote working. This has a very small impact, but it has an impact, and we need to extend that. A lot of people will be working from home, and perhaps they've realized that working from home, they've started turning their heating on, and they're now heating their entire house when they're actually probably only occupying 10 or 20% of it. Again, we can use technology in this field of energy and innovation, and we absolutely need to take advantage of that, and we need to stop the waste that is going on at the moment. So I think this is really important to me, and I think we should look at it as an opportunity, and hopefully we can use this digital technology for the better and innovation and for the future of Wales. Thank you.
Hello, Giles.
Hi, Tony.
Okay, Giles, I'm sorry, I've had a problem here. My PC's shut down. I've changed over to my mobile.
This is why we need to improve our digital infrastructure. Fantastic, yeah, fantastic example.
I'll just pass over to Wayne. Wayne, I'll just spotlight you now.
Hiya, thanks very much indeed. Do you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Very good. Well, firstly, thanks very much. I was going to say thank you very much to Tony for the introduction, but thank you very much indeed to Cardiff University, to Welsh Government for the opportunity to be with you today. It's a great pleasure, and I also just want to say a +1 for everything that Giles had to mention. I too had some challenges with the technology this morning, which is quite hilarious given that I'm here to talk about the technology opportunity. Dylan, thank you so much. I have been able to recover my presentation, so I'm going to switch over to that now. So bear with me whilst I just do that. Hold on. So hopefully you see my slides now.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Very good. All right. So once again, thank you very much for the opportunity today. And may I also just give this opportunity, I don't know if he can hear me, and if he is, hopefully he isn't blushing too much, but thank you very much indeed to Tony for his fantastic stewardship of the Superfast Advisory Panel over the last few years. It's been a great pleasure and a privilege really to be a part of that programme since its inception. And I very much hope that we can sort of repurpose the amazing community of folks that Tony's brought together and Michael have brought together for the longer term, because I'm sure there's still an awful lot left for all of us to do. I have taken Giles's timeline. I must have been in the technology industry for about 3.5 minutes then, I think, because I'm 36 years in the IT industry. I spent 17 years with Microsoft and 13 years at IBM before that. And today I work for Amazon Web Services, AWS. I'm not here to talk about AWS, but just to give a bit of context, AWS is the cloud computing or utility computing division of Amazon, the A standing for Amazon in AWS. But I'm really here to talk more about cloud and how cloud is one of the technologies that's going to be a hero technology, as my colleagues in the US say, around the next stage of the development of our economy. We heard from Professor Brown this morning, fantastic discussion there about Wales 4.0, clearly built upon the notion of Industry 4.0. So I'm not going to spend too long going through the I4.0 stuff because we've heard about it the last couple of days as well as also this morning. But I just want to point out here that whilst all of these technologies independently are tremendously interesting and exciting, and you see cloud is listed as one of those technologies on the roster here. Actually, cloud is the technology, the pervasive technology that makes all of these other technologies work the way that they are designed to. So things like big data analytics, things like industrial IoT, even things like additive manufacturing really depend upon the ability to get access to utility-based computing. or cloud computing. And we call it utility-based computing because it is really another utility. It's a bit like electricity. And going back to thinking about how electricity started 120 odd years ago, if you wanted electricity, you generated it yourself. And that changed a lot with the implementation of the grid, where it became on demand. You paid for it as you went, you paid for how much you used, and you used it for whatever it was that you chose to use it for. And very few people today feel the need to generate their own electricity. They rather depend upon a utility-based service with all the benefits that that generates. So cloud is very much of that modality, and it supports all of those Industry 4.0 activities. So what is cloud, and why is it useful? I think the best way to describe it is, as this slide suggests, which is everything that you typically did in a traditional data center, whether that's a really small data center, a broom cupboard under the stairs, or a really large data center that took up something the size of a football field. You can do all of that today with on-demand services without having to own or invest or manage any of that infrastructure for yourself. You can leave all of that to somebody else. And then you can run your applications reliably and securely with a very high degree of availability without a lot of the skills and the know-how. And there's a number of the themes that Giles mentioned in his presentation. I'll pick up and develop as we go through here, because I think there's a real sort of segue between us in terms of what Giles had to say as well. So it's about the ability to do pretty much everything that you used to do on premises, the ability to do it in the cloud, to do it immediately without provisioning any equipment, without incurring those capital expenditures, and the ability to do it without really having any IT know-how and skills in the way that you would have done in the past. So democratization of enterprise technologies. So you'll find that there's plenty of descriptions about what hyperscale computing is, if you're interested. This one is from that very well respected and renowned resource for these such things, Wikipedia. But perhaps a more important one is this one that was shared with us yesterday, which was the Horizon Scanning report from Cardiff University, which is done a couple of years ago now, but it's still incredibly useful, I believe. And the link is here on the slides, and you'll be able to find it. I think Dylan is proposing to share some links with us all after the event. And if you're interested in cloud, I thoroughly recommend you taking a look at this report. I think it's excellently well prepared, and I think it gives you a really good indication of why it's relevant and important to the economy of Wales. So who are these hyperscale cloud providers? So cloud is a relatively new thing. It's been around for about 10 years or so. So, again, on Giles's timeline, sort of born yesterday. But it's evolved at an enormous pace over that period of time. And in fact, it's actually evolved enormously even over the last 9 months that we've been in the COVID situation. And, just what we're doing today wouldn't be possible without access to a hyperscale cloud provider. And pretty much everything that we do on a daily basis these days in some way, shape or form involves some degree of interactivity. A person's journey through the day or through the week involves leveraging capabilities provided by hyperscale cloud providers. So who are them? Who are these folks? Well, a slightly more reputable resource here than Wikipedia. This is Gartner. So what Gartner say is that here are the providers. There's not many globally. There's 6. There's 1 or 2 that have joined in recent times, and 1 or 2 that have exited the market as well. So it's not hugely dynamic in terms of participants, but you can see they're all really significant names in the industry. And in the case of some of them, they've been around for a really long time. I used to work for over 100 years. These days I work for Amazon Web Services, and we've been going for just over 10. So it's a fairly, whilst it's a fairly small crowd of people, it's quite a diverse crowd in that sense. So why are businesses adopting cloud computing? So what is the reasons why? So let me just go through a few of them. And they've kind of a few of them are touched on by Giles' presentation and mentioned yesterday actually too. This is business about trading upfront expense for variable expense. If you wanted to get access to the best in class computing, historically for the last 50 years, you probably needed to spend a lot of money upfront. You needed to make a big capital investment. You no longer do that. You basically use cloud in the way that you would use electricity. The more you use, the more you pay, but you pay as you go. And the more you use, the cheaper it gets, because you get discounts for using more. So that's a huge change in how companies need to plan for their funds and their and the way that they operate the business. And I'll touch on this with a case study and an example of a Welsh business towards the end. Benefit from the massive economies of scale means that we buy an enormous amount of stuff. We are AWS, and the cloud industry is the biggest customer now of the manufacturers of silicon chips for processors, for memory, for storage, and so forth. We are able to leverage huge amounts of purchasing power. You don't have to guess at your capacity. When you built infrastructure in the past, you didn't really know how much you needed to use it. If you put infrastructure in place a year ago and you hadn't foreseen the pandemic, you probably would have had to gone out and bought some more. But actually, of course, what most people have just done is they've just topped it up by buying on demand from cloud providers. Speed and agility, the ability to do new things and innovate at the speed of the cloud provider, not the speed of your wallet or the speed of your ability to absorb the skills and technology. You can leverage this technology. AWS, I won't mention this any more times, I promise you. We've got over 200 services now that cover absolutely everything that was on that Industry 4.0 chart at the beginning. So basically, you can dive right into Industry 4.0 by just leveraging the services of the cloud providers. You don't need to run your data center. We talked about that. Going global in minutes, you have the ability to attract global customers. That's super important in the context of the economy of Wales. You know, we have an amazing place to live. We have a fantastic opportunity for a great lifestyle, but we don't just want to be selling to our neighbors or to people down the road. We want to be selling on a global basis. And the cloud gives you that ability to go global and to run a global business from Wales. And the breadth of services, I talked about that already. Amazon, we believe in this growth flywheel. This is a sort of a napkin drawing drawn by our chief executive, Jeff Bezos, 20 odd years ago when he set up Amazon, 30 years ago nearly now. And that's really the kind of philosophy behind all of the cloud providers. The more utilization that we get of our services, the better that we can provide those services. We can offer lower prices, and we can actually provide that capability to more customers. That's very much at the heart of the cloud mentality. So how is cloud helping SMEs? Because as we've heard from Phil earlier on, you know, we're a nation of SMEs in Wales, and what looked like that's a bit of a challenge in terms of the transition that our economy has made from the old economy, the carbon economy, as Giles was saying earlier on, to the new economy of Wales. Where average sizes of organisations are measured in less than 10, and you know, the great work that the Cardiff University Economic Research Units did in looking at the adoption of superfast broadband in Wales and how it's having a significant impact on the SME community. Well, one of the reasons why it has an impact on the SME community is because it allows you to access the cloud, and the cloud is the way that you do all of these things. So let me just talk a little bit about them. So equalizing the opportunity to innovate. So if in the past, in the old world, the world that I came from for 30 odd years, if you wanted to innovate, you had to spend big money. You had to go and buy equipment. You had to go and buy software. You had to probably go and get skills of people to run all of that stuff that you didn't necessarily have. If you were an SME, it was really, really difficult to be able to equalize that opportunity. That's not the case with the cloud now, and I'll talk a little bit more about unicorns and startups and stuff in a second, so which hopefully illustrates this. The ability to flexibly compete globally. I mentioned this just now. I can't tell you how important this is, and the case study I'm going to give you of a Welsh business who is a partner of ours at AWS, but a cloud partner of Microsoft's as well, really illustrates that from Wales, there's really no reason anymore why you can't compete, because everything that you do is in the cloud. You don't have to visit companies' premises to be able to deliver great capability and services in the cloud. So the ability for an SME to compete globally from a low cost, great lifestyle economy like we have in Wales, we just need to seize that opportunity. Reducing time and costs to market. So improving efficiency, improving quality, and driving down cost. This is really important if you're an SME and you're looking to expand, if you're looking to grow what you do. You want to make yourself investable. And again, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that firms that leverage the cloud, and I'll tell you a bit about it in a second, have become really amazingly investable, and this is why they've become unicorns. So utilizing the cloud to make your business investable, but also then building your own business on the cloud, picking up on Giles's point about building digital native businesses in Wales, building cloud businesses here in Wales, because this is a great place for us to be able to. Wales has a lot to offer in respect of that. Super fast is a really big and important element to that too. So let me talk about a friend of mine. This is Jim, or James as he is titled here, and he's the CTO of a partner of ours called Mobilize. Mobilize are based down in Swansea, and I've known Jim since he set up this business 6 years ago, because I first met him when I joined AWS. And when I met Jim, he had just set up the company. They were actually called something different in those days, but they were called Skybrid. But they got a cease and desist letter from Mr. Maxwell's lawyers, Murdoch's lawyers rather, a few months later, and they changed the name to Mobilize. And I love the name. I think it really kind of does sum up what they're all about. It's about mobilizing the cloud. And I work with Jim a lot, and this is a presentation that he gives. So he's kindly allowed me to sort of share it with you today. So from their offices in Swansea, this is the logos that Mobilize have been able to win through their cloud business. And you can see it's a fantastic advertisement for their business. Not just in Wales or local, obviously they're very proud of what they've done with Welsh Government and with the DVLA in Wales and Traffic Wales, but all of these businesses really kind of expanding out across the UK and increasingly now expanding globally, as I mentioned earlier on, being able to challenge for business outside of the UK because of the ability to use the cloud. So him and his fellow directors used to be owners of a data center. That's what they did. They'd done it for many, many years. And they sold that data center and they sold that business, and they decided, well, what are we going to do in this kind of moment? And as you can see here, what they decided to be was become cloud gurus of the new technology, the technology of the next decade or so, and really set up a business that was cloud native, as we call it. So from a business perspective, in the old world, they needed large amounts of fixed capital, as he says here, 600,000 for that data center, large capital investments, evergreen, because they had to keep on replacing stuff every year to keep it current and to replace the stuff that breaks, because everything breaks all the time. Limited commercial flexibility, their contracts were the contracts and they had to be long-term to get their money back. And innovation was pretty much impossible, to be fair, when he tells this story, not just expensive and time-consuming, because you'd have to go back all around all this cycle again. You'd have to go back and reinvest in a whole bunch of new stuff that you probably couldn't afford. When they set up the cloud business 6 years ago, they set that up with £3. That's the share capital of the company. That's all they needed. They didn't actually need any other capital. They had no fixed costs. They didn't even have an office back then. They had no capital investment. They had an evergreen budget of £0. They didn't have to provision cash out of their business to pay for keeping their services up to date and to adding new services to meet customer demand. They could just switch them on, try things out. If it didn't work, you can fail fast, and you can get back up again and you can start over again, and really you've lost almost nothing. Huge amount of commercial flexibility because they don't have a contract with a cloud provider. It's an ad hoc relationship. It means that they can have very commercially flexible arrangements. And his biggest challenge is keeping up with change, because all the cloud providers are innovating at an incredible pace, and making sure that they keep pace with that innovation is actually one of their biggest challenges today. And one of the biggest things that they've done on innovation is they've been able to teach Alexa to speak Welsh. It's a fantastic process that they went through to do that. And I really encourage you to take a look at their website, have a look at some of their videos on the Mobilize website that explain how they were able to teach Alexa to speak in our language, and also to extend that out into the use within call centers and other such places using robotic process automation using the Welsh language. Absolutely extraordinary. So, you know, in summary then, I just in the interest of time, I won't go through them all, but the most important thing is not needing these deep pockets to start a cloud business, which I think resonates entirely well with Phil Brown's report really here, which says, how do we encourage the new economy in Wales? Well, we can't encourage the new economy in Wales if you need lots of capital and you need lots of risk capital to be able to start a business. Cloud allows you not to do that. All right. So I talk a little bit about unicorns. So these are billion-dollar valuation companies. And 16 out of the 17 run on us, on AWS. I'm sure the 17th one runs on somebody else's cloud. But all of these are firms that, you know, have become household names, and we forget how recent they are. They're all companies that only kind of really established themselves in the last 3 or 4 years in some cases. And some of these are people that we use every single day, aren't they? I mean, not so much Zoopla these days, or Skyscanner maybe, but I think Just Eat and Deliveroo have probably felt the opposite effect. And their business has just been spectacular. And the reason that they've been able to scale to the degree that they have in the pandemic, of course, is because they have this flexibility of utilizing on-demand resources through the cloud. So in the UK, we're very fortunate that we rank #1 in Europe for unicorns over the last 12 months. But actually, as you can see on the graph here, you know, we've been ahead since 2010 in the UK. But what I'm really keen to see is that we grow unicorns in Wales, and that we take the lead from what's happened in other parts of the UK. We learn those lessons, and we actually double down from an economic perspective in Wales to make sure that we have created the right climate. So technically the right climate, super fast broadband, the cloud, that's the technical climate. The economic climate in Wales, support from the Welsh government, and we heard Michael talk about that earlier on this morning. You know, we're ready to create the new unicorns of Wales. And I'm a real optimistic kind of person. I'm whilst I might be male and pale, I definitely don't think I'm stale despite 36 years in the industry. I'm more enthusiastic about the prospects for the Welsh economy because of all the things that we've been speaking about the last 2 days than I've ever been before. And I've taken a bit of a liberty here with our national emblem and our flag. And I hope nobody takes offence by what I'm suggesting here. But I'd love to see an adjustment to our flag that shares the mighty Welsh dragon with the unicorn of business. And as we grow, prosperity for all in Wales, leveraging the technology, building Wales 4.0. And you know, I think if we do that, we have an incredibly bright and prosperous future, decarbonised, bright, prosperous future. So, diolch yn fawr, many thanks indeed, and I'll happily take some questions on the panel if any of you have got anything that you need to ask me. Thank you very much once again.
Right, thank you for that, Wayne. I'm just checking now on a different machine. Are you hearing me and seeing me?
Beautifully, Tony. Yes. Lovely.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, in fairness to Wayne, technology let me down for a minute or so, but thanks to superfast broadband, I soon restated the system here. But I didn't have the chance to introduce Wayne. So in fairness to him, let me just say a few words. He said that he's worked for AWS for the past 6 years, but before that, he worked for IBM and Microsoft. So in fact, Wayne has worked for the biggest IT and cloud service companies in the world. And he does have a long history of engagements with government customers and agencies in Wales. And as he said, he is a member of the Superfast Business Exploitation Advisory Group, and his breadth of IT and cloud-based application knowledge is also much appreciated. He's also an executive sponsor of AWS relationship with several public sector customers in Wales. He's proudly Welsh, as you heard just now with that. I like that new flag, Wayne. We'll have to adopt that. I think I'll have that created for my boat for next summer. But he is proudly Welsh. He hails from Pembrokeshire. He attended Milford Haven Grammar School and Aston University, and a regular contributor to debate on all matters technical. So many, many thanks to you, Wayne. Now, I'm glad to say that we have had a number of questions. So I'd like to get on with that. Somebody's texted me, said, we can't see you, Tony. Is that the case?
That's right, we can't see you, Tony.
Okay. Can you see me now?
Can see your initials now.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm clicking the right icons, but
you're sharing your screen now.
Right.
I wouldn't let it hold up the questions there, Tony.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Let's crack on then. Let's start with a question here for Michael.
I asked for that, didn't I?
I did indeed. And I'm glad you can't see me now because I'm desperately looking for my notes. Right, here we go. This is from the FSB, from Llyr Ap Gareth. And I'd be interested in Phil's response to this question as well. Business support is very important, and Business Wales is now a well-known brand. Is there a wider plan for working with business supply chains management and networks to help spread good practice and innovation? I mean, I was interested to see on both Michael and Phil's presentation the importance of developing vertical industry sector for further development, but clear here is specifying supply chain management and networks to help spread good practice and innovation. So, Michael, would you like to answer that, please?
I'll give it a go. So, supply chain management. Yeah, I guess at a high level, absolutely. This will probably emerge over the coming weeks when we talk about the development of the All Wales digital strategy through its blogging process. Procurement, for example, is one of the priorities listed under the digital economy activity, and that isn't just around public sector procurement, but that's about helping businesses themselves procure more effectively. Supply chain is always a challenge, I guess, when people are not joined up within that supply chain using digital platforms. Larger corporates internationally are very good at insisting that their supply chains adopt technologies. That's happened for decades. I think what we need to do, though, is help businesses in Wales collectively work towards using shared systems for supply chain management. As far as working with industry more broadly is concerned, well, I did touch on the fact that we want to develop digital working groups for industry clusters. We want to make sure that those digital working groups are made up of representation and influencers and champions and evangelists from different clusters. I think what's critical here is that we all recognise that this is not a Welsh government or any government's sole fix. This is a challenge. This is an opportunity for which a lot of players need to play their part. So industry itself has to contribute towards the solution. We will absolutely seek to bear influence and bring support and get shoulder behind things. But I think what we will see emerging over the next couple of months is outlined plans to help industry help itself as much as anything else.
Right, thank you, Michael. Phil, any comments on that?
Yeah, just to add to that. I mean, again, I think that's pretty encouraging. I mean, I think the thing is, it's about the scale of it, and I think as Michael was saying, that it's how we kind of create those lead bodies in terms of the clusters around innovation. So how do we know? I mean, one of the things that concerns me is that I think we've been flying kind of at least partially sighted because we've lacked the foresight and analytics that we've needed to see where companies and industries are going. We need a better understanding of that and thinking about how we share that with companies, including SMEs. So the kind of shared service approach, you know, not just thinking about individual companies, but how can we scale and align, I think is actually vitally important. So I'm hoping this is something that could be taken forward. It's certainly something which I think that DNA could contribute towards. And you know, didn't really have time to say it before, but what I'd really like is as many people on this call as possible to get involved in discussions about that, shaping that DNA, because I think it's an important part. But this is one of the key things, about how we align and share these services and share the insights that we can then move forward with.
Okay, many thanks for that, Phil. And in fact, Llŷr has sent another message pointing out that he did ask that question early on, and some of his concerns were discussed in the excellent presentations, which I agree with him. And he also agrees that there's a very important role for Welsh Government in bringing things together. So that's great. A question now for Giles. In fact, I've got a couple of questions for Giles. The first one is from Professor Professor Monday, Max. Are the regulatory issues hinted at by Giles common in other parts of the UK, or are these more unique Welsh problems? Giles.
I mean, the regulation is a UK-wide issue, so I think the impacts are probably felt more in Wales because of the rural nature. So, for instance, the announcement that I mentioned, a large telco yesterday, came out of a loophole in the regulation that means that particular provider doesn't seem to have significant market power in that particular product. Now, in Wales, it does have absolute a monopoly in that particular product. So unfortunately, we will feel the effects more in Wales than say the rest of the UK probably will. So you know, the regulation is generally UK wide, and as far as I'm concerned, you know, it would be useful if perhaps the Welsh Government got involved more in the regulation and perhaps use some of the devolved powers to combat some of those issues.
Okay, thank you for that. There's another question for you as well. This is from Dylan Henderson. Much of the policy emphasis to date has been on fixed broadband infrastructure in Wales. To what extent might innovation or innovative mobile solutions contribute towards Wales's digital challenge?
So I think, again, you know, the wireless technology, the mobile technology is absolutely critical. You cannot have one without the other. You unfortunately need both. And I think, you know, we have challenges with the physical infrastructure in Wales, but we also have challenges in mobile infrastructure. And, you know, if we want to talk about some of the latest developments in wireless technologies, then obviously, you know, we look at 5G, for instance, and China through Huawei took a huge lead in that area, and we're even seeing the European providers of 5G struggling. So I think unless we can start getting involved in improving our infrastructure and starting to look at other options for this technology, we are going to be, you know, stuck with poor 4G, let alone 5G infrastructure. So we need to really work on things to make sure that we can make it easier for those mobile operators to come in and make it more economically viable for them to come in and create a better mobile coverage in Wales. But I say you cannot have one without the other. We need physical fibre and we need the wireless technologies just as much.
Okay, thank you for that, Giles. I have a question here from John Evans, and I'm going to throw this open to all the presenters, actually, because each one of you may be able to contribute to the answer. He also asked the presenters, what is available in terms of financial support, grants and so on for SMEs, and how do they access that support? As a business, he says that we have invested heavily in digital technologies, but have had little or no financial support from outside the business. So this is something that I hear quite often, that, you know, there's lots of knowledge out there to be accessed, lots of support from Welsh Government, but not the financial support. So I think I'll start with you, Michael, if I may.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Okay, so I'll play devil's advocate a bit. first, and I can comfortably do this, having run projects supporting businesses specifically for ICT and digital dating back to the early noughties in Wales. So we have in the past delivered grants. We have also seen local authorities deliver grants for ICT as well. I have a view, which I know is shared by others, that sometimes if you give grants for investment in things, people concentrate more on spending the money on something rather than buying the solution that is maybe absolutely right for the business's needs. I think to take a number of the points that Wayne raised as well is that affordability for technologies is significantly different and much more affordable than it was only a handful of years ago, and that cloud-based solutions, whether they be free versions, subscription versions, or revenue versions, are significantly less than the requirements for capital outlay for digital solutions. That said, there has been grant funding available. Welsh Government over the last 6 or so months has put in place £1.7 billion in economic recovery funding. Digital projects were eligible certainly under the ERF3, which was the last tranche of that funding. Nobody's necessarily going to be waving £10 notes at businesses, waiting for businesses to want to come and chase grants. Businesses need to be aware of the funding that might be available. And as I said, the ERF funding is certainly one that could support digital projects. I think grant culture can be a dangerous thing. I think though businesses need to make sure that they are investing in the right technologies that pay for themselves in relatively short turnaround times. That spending on infrastructure or digital should be a self-funding activity in course. Spend to save, spend to be better, spend to be more profitable, etc. And I guess I'll probably finish by saying we could very easily hand out grants if we wanted to, but every £1,000 handed out in a grant could be £1,000 spent educating 20 businesses to be better procurers and buyers of digital.
Yes, that's a very important point at the end there, Michael. Many thanks for that. Giles, can I turn to you, because you're a man that supports lots of new starts. What's your opinion on this? We're not hearing you, Giles.
Sorry, that's me. That's a technology fail on my behalf. Sorry, I'm unmuting myself.
Well
Yeah, it's a very hot topic at the moment, and it's a difficult one. From me being private sector entrepreneurial, the way I look at Welsh Government now, they definitely have changed from a grant culture. At one point, as far as I was concerned, and this is my personal opinion, is that money was being thrown around all sorts of, and larger companies, I'm sure from an SME point of view, they get fed up with seeing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds being given to larger companies for job support schemes and various other things, and assistance to bring their businesses in. And it can be quite frustrating. The only ray of hope I can really offer an SME is really to say, in actual fact, the one thing we probably need to do better in Wales, and SMEs can do it, is looking at getting other sources of finance, private finance. You can sort of look at VC funding. You've got the Bank of Wales, Bank of Wales, but there are also other investors. Money has become quite cheap recently. The biggest problem we have is that most people don't know how to access it. And I think there's a really good opportunity that small businesses can get access to funding, especially for things like digital transformation, that it will help their businesses, and it is accessible quite cheaply. And I think we probably have to, unfortunately, move more to an area where we seek out some private sector investment funding or debt funding, rather than rely on Welsh Government, who, quite frankly, I think have struggled in the past with grants and doing it the right way. I do think for grant funding, I think that especially in to a certain extent high risk categories where potentially it may need to stimulate innovation, especially if you're looking at something like green technologies and this kind of thing, where the green premium, if you like, is a premium, and we need to assist businesses with that. But I spend an awful lot of my time assisting businesses raising financing, and it is getting much easier to do that. And it sort of was a black art, but it is getting easier. So I think, unfortunately, we have to rely less on Welsh Government and more on doing things ourselves. So that's really all I can say on that one.
Okay, many thanks for that, Giles. It's very interesting. Phil, in your work in developing policies for digital in Wales, has the issue of grants been raised with you?
Not especially, but I think it's questioning that grant culture, and it's moving away from that towards some notion of collective services, but also towards collective capacity building within the Welsh context. And I think that for me is the key thing. The details of actually the funding available, I'm not so aware of, but what I would do is just support what Giles has just said. I mean, there seems to be a lot of capital floating around at the moment, internationally. People don't know where to put their money, but we're not being very good at actually trying to tap some of those resources. And I personally think that one of the failings is because we've been very poor at presenting ourselves in Wales, beyond Wales, to a UK, but also to an international audience. And I think that's one of the key things around how do we actually sort of rebrand Wales. And we can do that. I think we can do it around digital, and around green, and around that kind of commitment to an inclusive society, which a lot of people, that interests a lot of people. So I think there are ways of doing that. But I think that unless we can actually pull together, and we've got these international offices, but are they doing a decent job at really presenting Wales in a coherent, interesting way? I'm not sure they are. Our marketing campaigns, are they actually on message? Why haven't we brought this together? I've said this a few times before. If you look at our adverts for rugby internationals, they're brilliant. They're really interesting. But if you look at how we present Wales internationally, it's not. I don't think it's very good at all. So I think that the investment question comes from presenting Wales and Welsh companies as worth looking at. And then there's a herd mentality. So once one or two do it, more will want to do it. And I think that's something we need to look at.
Well, thanks for that, Phil. You raise a lot of questions in your answer, very interesting ones, which could quite easily form another very interesting webinar. But thanks for that. Wayne, has ASW have lots of funds to give to Welsh firms?
Funnily enough, actually, we have made significant contributions. So let me just explain that. And this isn't just AWS specific. I think I really want to talk on behalf of the cloud industry in a way. All the cloud providers have what we call a free tier. So we talked about cloud being relatively inexpensive and pretty easy to access. The way that you get started with the cloud is to open an account and to access the free tier. And that gives you the opportunity to experiment. It gives you the opportunity to try things out and to have a go and see whether it's for you. And I think many people come to us through the free tier. But we also have a lot of support, not grants, but credits, use credits on our system. And I'm talking about AWS specifically here. I can't speak for the others in this case. The use credits on the program, or the use credit programs, are really there to encourage SMEs. So we've been quite heavily involved with Welsh ICE and the incubator network around the country, and the ability to be able to share for them to be able to share the credits out for themselves. So, you know, they know much better than we do. So we have a program called AWS Activate, and Activate is really all about making sure that accelerators and incubators get access to free credits that they can disperse amongst their community. It's not just a peanut butter thing. It's not like $500 each for everybody. The idea is that, you know, they can really overinvest in somebody who's got more usage requirements than somebody who's got minimal usage requirements. And the second point I'd make about that as well is in education. We heard about it from a skills perspective. And one of the things that all cloud providers do, but again, I can only speak for AWS, is that we invest heavily in both in curriculum content, in terms of educating people about the use of the cloud, but again, also providing use credits, free access to our system, in other words, for people in students in higher education initially, but that goes all the way down through to 14-year-olds now. So we can do that at the institution level, through the universities, through schools, but we can also do it at the individual learner level, and that's called AWS Educate. And you know, if you want to access free stuff, cloud's pretty cheap anyway, but if you want cheaper than cheap, i.e. free, then get yourself on either Activate or Educate, or work through one of the incubators and accelerator programs, or just look at the free tier. So I think there is quite a degree of support, yes.
Okay, many thanks for that, Wayne. Cheaper than cheap, that sounds nice. Another question now. This is for Giles, but I'll be interested in if Phil has anything to say about this as well. And it relates to Giles's earlier comment about without competition, we don't have innovation. And the question from Jonathan Rees is, what about disruptive startups, entrepreneurship cells, and new industries? So that's disruptive startups, entrepreneurship cells, and new industries. Giles.
Okay, hopefully I sort of understand the question from that. So when I'm looking at when I'm talking about competition and innovation, is that certainly from an infrastructure perspective, if we don't have competition in infrastructure and we don't have access to things like dark fiber that allows us to develop, you know, sort of technologies like optical routing, because we can't do that in Wales because we don't have the infrastructure to do it, then in theory those technologies have to be developed elsewhere, and we can't do them. If we're looking at disruptive startups in industry in general, obviously it doesn't necessarily prevent somebody coming in and creating a Just Eat or a Deliveroo, if you like, type business, but it possibly affects the client base, because we're in a situation where if we don't have access to low-cost services, I mean, for instance, it would be absolutely useless for Netflix to sell their services if we were all still on sort of dial-up technologies, and they wouldn't get any customers in Wales. So you know, we have to have that infrastructure, but it doesn't necessarily prevent startups in other industries. Entrepreneurship, that's an interesting one for me, because often cited as being an entrepreneur and being quoted the difference between an intrapreneur and an entrepreneur, and I think it's interesting because they've referred to it as entrepreneurship cells, which is quite interesting, because entrepreneurship was always seen as an individual within a big corporate, to a certain extent, could come up with a product or service that was innovative, was very entrepreneurial in style, and they were allowed to develop that in a large corporation. I think, I mean, Harvard Business School did a lot of work on entrepreneurship and found that it was pretty much a myth, unless the entire business had that sort of entrepreneurial spirit. So the fact that they've called it an entrepreneurship cell, I'm assuming alludes to the fact that this is a group of people within an organization that can come up with new technologies. But we tend to find that they are often stifled by the senior management or the culture within the business. And we don't see an awful lot of entrepreneurship in probably in Wales. but it would be better to see more of it. And I think if we're talking about sort of entrepreneurship, startups, disruption, that's what we want to see. We want to see more of that in Wales. But I really think it will be helped by having the competition in Wales. We could say, well, there's more opportunities for disruption if there isn't competition, but it doesn't necessarily benefit the people of Wales if we don't actually have that competition. I'm not too sure whether that answers the question, but that's
well, I think that's a very good stab. Thank you for that, Jed. Phil, any comments?
Very, very briefly on that. Competition is obviously can be very positive. But on the other hand, what you don't want to do is create a race to the bottom. So it depends on how that competition is actually structured, and structuring that competition and shaping markets in a way which allow the kind of competition that allow for positive outcomes, like Giles is talking about, is obviously something we'd obviously want to encourage. And in terms of disruptive startups, I think we do not a bad job in terms of startups. But the question there is, how can they be supported to scale, to get beyond very small number of employees? How do we engage in that? And that's, I think, where the shared services comes in. And I actually think that there is much to be done around, for example, cloud computing in terms of sharing. And I particularly would love to see some more experimentation around the foundation economy in terms of disruptive startups and scaling, and what that might actually look like. And there's no doubt about it, but in terms of entrepreneurship, the companies, many companies have these groups that are spun off to look at particular. But I don't, as Giles is saying, I don't think we'd do very well at that in Wales. And I think the reason for that is because we're not seen to be the heart of research and development and high-level innovation. And so again, this is all about how we present ourselves and developing the skills and the capability that will say, okay, there's some areas of AI, for example, Wales is good at that. And that's where you're going to get that kind of activity. So that's why I think we want to argue that these things are interconnected.
Right, thanks, Phil.
Tony, this is Wayne here. May I just make a quick contribution to that comment, if I may?
Sure.
So I'd just like to sort of here give a plug for a government agency in Wales. It's not Welsh government, it's a UK government agency, and it happens to be one of the largest employers in Swansea, and that's the DVLA. The DVLA, whilst obviously they're a public body, very much have taken some of these initiatives to heart. So DVLA has created cells inside of their own organisation to be the leaders around how cloud technologies and disruptive and innovative technologies in general actually can be applied to public service. And they're providing a huge amount of thought leadership and actually some practical support to other government agencies in their own digital transformation, because the DVLA, I'm very biased, not only from the perspective that they use our technology, that's by the by, but I'm also the executive sponsor on our relationship with them, so I get to know them quite well. And it's really impressive how they've been able to sort of create capabilities and technology with the technology that they can use not only for their own use, but they can share that across the broader government, particularly the transport cluster with DVSA and other transport agencies. But the second part of that as well is that they've been supporting SMEs, in some case micro businesses, because they want those people to come in and help them with that disruptive technology. And even if you just think about how you tax your car today compared with what you did 5 or 6 years ago, where you need 3 physical bits of paper, the insurance, the MOT, and the ownership document, where you went and stood in line in the post office for 25 minutes behind somebody getting their holiday money out, and you had to pay by check. They didn't even take a card transaction for many years. You think about that now compared with the experience today. All of that stuff's been enabled because of the digital transformation that are pretty long-term government agency, long-standing government agency has been able to do. It's an amazing digital revolution, and they really want to share that innovation with other government agencies and other government departments in Wales as well as UK government agencies. So I don't think it's just limited to private sector. I think we need to look at how disruptive technology using SMEs, building world-class capabilities and then sharing that, to Phil's point. I think that's really important, and I think that if we do that as a community in Wales, we'll really accelerate and outpace the market if we do a really good job in sharing that information.
Thank you for that, Wayne. That's great. Right, we are running out of time now, but I'm going to ask one question again. This is from Laura Norris from the Business School. What strategies might you suggest for increasing the stickiness of Wales for more fleet of foot companies? Phil, would you like to have a go at this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. My response to it is that I'm basically, I haven't quite finished reading it, but I'm examining a PhD tomorrow morning from somebody from Oxford who's looking at university business collaboration. And the thing that comes across really strongly in that thesis, and they look at a number of collaborations, is the importance of trust. And this is why I mentioned earlier about this point about these relationships can't simply be transactional. If they're transactional, it's very easy for people to move away and for companies to leave and put these things somewhere else. If it's more relational, if you're building relations between people and if you're building trust between them, that is the foundation actually of learning. Because a lot of innovation is about a learning process, which is dynamic because it's obviously changing very rapidly. So if we build a context where companies feel that they are engaged in a form of capacity building and a form of learning, which they might not get somewhere else, they're much more likely to stick with us. And also, if they believe that Wales is on the move and there are things that are exciting going on here, and they can buy into the lifestyle which is available, again, there's quite a lot of positives about being and staying in Wales, I think.
Right. Many thanks for that, Phil. I won't extend that question to the other panel members now because we are over time. So I think it's been very, very interesting this morning listening to the four presenters. I feel very positive after listening to you. Clearly, we all think that there are wonderful opportunities in Wales. We've achieved a lot, but clearly there's a lot more to do. But Wales as a nation, we are in a very strong position to grasp the opportunities. And I'm delighted with Michael's speech about the new developments in terms of the strategy. It's very broad ranging, but support for businesses and the further development of digital applications, etc. It's all there. Phil, of course, a lot of what he's done supports the work that Michael was presenting as well. And I'm delighted to see that industry sectors will form an important pillar of further developments. That is the most efficient way to develop new ways of working. Giles, of course, a man with infrastructure knowledge. He's told us about new services on stream, but also pointed out the importance of training. And I feel myself that hasn't been considered enough, and perhaps that's something for the near future. And then, of course, Giles then told us all about the wonderful applications coming through, cloud applications that will support all the what was mentioned by the previous three speakers. So there's been a very good flow of information during this presentation. It's left me feeling very. So thank you all, the speakers, for your excellent presentations. I'd also like to thank the Welsh Economy Research Unit staff for managing the webinar for us. Thank you for your excellent questions. Sorry we ran out of time, or we ran out of time, but very grateful for that, and thank you all for attending. So take care, good afternoon to you all. Cymerwch ofael a prynhawn da i chi gyd.
Thank you.